So for these little ink examples, we're going to be using two different types of paper. We're going to be using this Khadi, which is handmade paper from India. Now it's quite roughly textured, which is great for dry brush technique, and that's where you use a semi-dry brush and you drag it on its edge, at least that's what I call it, across the paper, and it picks up all the little high points of the paper. So if you use a really smooth paper, it doesn't quite work as well. So for dry brush work, I find that rough paper is really much better. But because one of the nice things about this process is you can just use it for scraps. So anything you've got lying around, you could do a little bookmark for somebody, a little card or whatever. So we're going to be using, this is smooth, this is hot pressed Bockingford paper as well. So we should be able to see some of the differences between the two, hopefully, but it's just nice to try some new stuff. So materials, what do we need? Now I have a million really beautiful, nice inks that are chromatic inks and shimmer inks and do a million brilliant things. But for today's example, I want to use a fountain pen cartridge. Now hopefully you can see that. I'll put it in the other video there. So why am I using a fountain pen cartridge? Well, I want to show you that it doesn't really matter what you use, as long as you use an ink. So you can start off without buying anything. You can go and buy a bottle of blue ink for £2 or whatever, or you can just use one of your ink cartridges. Now if you've got a fountain pen, or most people have one lying in the bottom of a drawer and used somewhere, get a couple of the cartridges, empty that out into an egg cup or 2 egg cups, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so let's get cracking. What I'm going to do here is I'm literally going to take this cartridge, I'm going to chop the end off, and I'm going to put half of that in one egg cup and half of that in another, hopefully not spilling it everywhere. May I suggest you put down something to protect your work surface if it's delicate or precious. Now this is Grandad Bruce's table. I'm sure he wouldn't mind a little bit of ink on it, but anyway. So there we go. So I've snipped the top off that, and I'm going to put, it doesn't really want to come out, I'll have to give it a bit of a tap. Some in there. Come on. Release it. So, oops. So I'll squeeze that there. Yeah, you might want to do this by the sink. Anyway, at least it's all over my fingers as well. Right, anyway, so I need some water left over from the kids' breakfast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave one of that neat, and the other one I'm going to dilute it a little bit. So I'm going to put about that much in. Now just to test that, I've got some spare paper here, and you can see the difference. If I use a little bit of the neat ink here, see that's quite dark. Shouldn't really be putting ink in the kids' drinking water, but they make my life hell, so you can poison them as well. Right, so that's, you can see the difference there. Now this ink I'm using is just some random ink from one of my Lamy pens. I don't really know what the colour ink is. It's probably a Lamy blue. The brush I'm using is just a random thinnish old brush from God knows where. It doesn't really matter. The nice thing about this technique is you can do it with a big brush, you can do it with a tiny one, just have a play, see what you create. It's just paper at the end of the day. Okay, so let's take some of this thick Khadi paper here. Now I'm looking for a pencil, prepared as ever. Right, hold on. So I'll get my trusty mechanical Bernard. So this is a pencil. You don't have to use a pencil with this technique. You could go in and just get messy, put some water in, play about. But the reason why I'm sketching with pencil is because I think sometimes if you're trying something new, it's good to have some sort of foundations to work on. It's a bit less scary. So yeah, we'll go in, we'll start with the sketch. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is about a third of the way up the page. I'm going to put in a jiggly line, trying to break the pencil straight away, like that. Again, some jiggles, and then we're going to go up, and then I'm going to do a little straight line here. And what I'm doing is a really rough sketch of a lighthouse. And this is going to be a little, you know me, I like my maritime scenes always, with boats and lighthouses. And then we're going to do a little lighthouse keeper's cottage here. Maybe another little house here to keep his pot noodles in, or whatever lighthouse keepers eat nowadays, probably electricity because they're all automated. And some trees, maybe some nice little pointy ones. And that's it there. Now there's going to be a horizon sort of vaguely about there. But that's all we need to do for now. You could do whatever you want, by the way. You could do a cityscape, you could do, well, I don't know, a car, or, whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay, so how does this process work? It's dead easy, dead easy. What you do is you get your water and you cover the whole of the sky. Now you can go to the edge of the paper, you could leave some big gaps, you could do whatever you want to do. You could go over the land, but what I would recommend you do is create a solid line where the horizon is so that we can do a separate drawing for the sea and a separate drawing for the land. Not a separate drawing, separate process, because we're going to be drying it in between with Harriet the hairdryer. We'll leave that for a couple of seconds. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add in some of the ink. We've got two different types of ink, of course. We've got the diluted version, and we've also got the full undiluted one. Now the diluted version is the one we're going to be using for the sky and the sea, but we're going to be applying those in slightly different ways. And then the full version is what we're going to be using to create the silhouette that is the landscape. So let's just move that around a bit. So what I'm doing is I'm just moving this around a little bit, just to try and get the water to soak in. I need more tea. Right. Okay. Right, so I'm going to take this diluted version and I'm going to imagine I'm starting in this corner and going up. So I'm going to go at that angle there. And then I'm going to take a line and I'm going to go up like that. And then I'm going to, don't use too much ink, we can use as much as you want. And then we're going to go, oh, that was the concentrated one, you see, I made a mistake there. So I'm going to dilute it down with a little bit of water. Yeah, I used the wrong ink. There you go. So again, dilute that down, put a little bit of water in there. Now if I wanted to here, I could transfer some of that across to here, like this. There we go. And then this is the danger, use the wrong ink. So I'm going to again put a little bit of that across there. So that's it. Now I could add all sorts of different stuff in. Well, actually, what I might do with this, I might take a little bit of that concentrated ink and just put it up there. Actually, just maybe add a bit in here too. There we go. And a bit more contrast in that sky. So that's how that looks. Now, what I would recommend you do is put that to one side and just let that dry naturally. Before going to do some of the other elements, or if you don't want to do that, I would say get a hairdryer and dry this, but you have to be quite careful because it can blow it off all over the place and you get runs everywhere. That can be quite a fun technique too, and we're going to come back to that in a second. So for our second version, now this one, this is again a pencil one. I'm going to use this hot press HP. So this is a smooth paper. Now for this one, what I want to do is some mountains of your choice. Just, yeah, you can put them in however. Thus. And then I'm going to do a bit of a sort of abstract wood scene. So these are going to be some pine woods, which obviously you can put in your own trees, and then there's going to be a bit of a cliff here, and then some more trees here, and then a bit of a house or a barn with a little chimney, and then we're going to go for some more trees again. And again, this is going to be bit of an abstract one. You could mess about, you could do anything for this, but the idea is here we're going to use 3 layers. So we're going to have a sky layer, and we're going to go in again with a second layer for these mountains in the background, and then the third layer is going to be this dark layer of silhouette. When you're drawing any kind of landscape stuff, you can use values to sort of show distance. So if something's further away, generally, not always, but it's lighter. And as it comes close to the foreground, it gets darker. Now, that's universally well, not always universally, but you can use that technique not only in your painting, but also in your line work, because it works similar for line work, or at least I find it does. So what we're going to do for this one, well, first we're going to do the faintest one, build up from light to dark. And I'll try and remember to use the right paint this time. Okay, so we're going to do the sky, and again, we're going to use water, fill in the sky area, and then we're going to dab some of that light stuff in to create some textures and some clouds. So let's have a go. Clean water as well before you start the next one. Put the sky in. Using that pencil line. A bit over the top there, so I can get a bit of tissue and just, this isn't probably the ideal brush for this. You probably need a slightly bigger brush if you want to get a lot of water on there. Okay, I'm just going to leave that actually. I'm not going to take that off with tissue. I want to just show that it really doesn't matter, this technique. If it gets a bit messy, if it doesn't quite work out, it really doesn't matter. So some of the lighter inks then, we're going to use some of these lighter inks. This is the lighter ink, not the full one, if you know what I mean. And I'm going to quite be a little bit dry here, a little in the far background, some thinner lines, and then as we get up to the top, oops, nearly did it again. We're going to do some big ones. Now the reason why I've done it that way is because there is perspective in the sky. So if there's regular clouds, the further they get away here, the closer the clouds get together. So what you're doing is you're sort of trying to show a little bit of that perspective. It's an opportunity to tell a story, right? So we'll put that in there like that. Okay, so that's the sky done, nice and simple. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to leave that one there. It's all a bit disjointed, this one, but the reason why I'm doing it this way is because we've got 3 different pictures and there is a time it takes for them to dry. Now you can use a hairdryer to speed it up, but often if there's actually water pooling on top of the paper, when you blast the hairdryer on it, it goes and flies off and you get these fantastic streaks. Now that can be cool, it can be a very nice effect, but I don't necessarily want to show that here. So we're going to let them dry a little bit initially, just so there's no standing water, and then blast them with the hairdryer in a bit. I'm talking very fast now. So the third version is more of a little kind of suburban scene. And as I say, you can use any of these for cards. You can buy cards like this. Now these are just blanks, card blanks. And you can fold them up and stick one of your pictures on and give those to someone. Tell them you love them or you hate them or whatever you want to do. You don't get cards like that, do you? I really hate you cards. Maybe that would be a new line. Yeah. What would the slogans be? Hating you gives me energy. I wish you specific harm. And yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I digress. Right. So yeah, the third one is going to be a look down, because I've made a little trade secret here. I've made some tiny sketches. Don't tell anyone. I'm going to draw a little wonky house with a wonky roof and a wonky chimney. Purposely not making these lines straight, trying to add a little bit of just theatre to it. Some windows. And then here we're going to have just some, like a row of houses coming down there. So there we go, you can be as stylized or as daft with it as you want. So this is really going to be two elements. Again, we're going to have a sky element and we're going to have a foreground. This one, so again, some water. We're going to actually, couldn't think of it, let's just do the whole lot. Because it doesn't matter. The foreground's going to be so much darker. We're going to do the whole lot. Okay, so then for this one, we're going to use some of the diluted ink again. And I'm going to be really fast and quick along the bottom here. Just do some sort of lines like that. And then I'm going to put in a little bit more ink up here. Again, not be too precious. And then finally, I'm going to take some of this really... You see how I'm splaying the brush a little bit there to try and put, again, a bit of perspective into it. I'm going to do something like that. Again, it's not... You can be as daft with it as you want. Have a play. Do 12 of these at once. Get a big piece of paper, chop it up. Just try loads of different stuff. You'll learn loads about applying paint. You'll learn loads about values as well. Yeah, do it. Right. So again, I'm going to put that to one side. Come on, sweetie. There you go. Over there. Good. Well done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get Harriet the hairdryer, and I'm going to... she's going to give these a really good dry. Okay, so I'm going to get a bit of tissue, and I'm just going to dry my brush so I don't keep diluting the ink with water when I put it in. So we're going to take... Another thing about working with ink is when you do washes, it's really good practice, because doing a regular wash, so starting at one side and working your way down, is a bit of a skill with watercolour that you learn as you go. And it's exactly the same principle in ink. The only difference between ink and watercolour, remember, is that ink is dye-based and watercolour is pigment-based. So that as they dry, an ink will give you a flatter tone of colour, whereas pigmented watercolours, particularly if they're granulated, they split up and become slightly different things. So ink will give you a more regular wash in a way, but it doesn't matter. It's the technique of how you apply it. So the way you apply a wash is that you get a lot on your brush and you start at the top, thus. Keep that brush nice and wet and you work your way down. So I'm making sure that I keep a wet edge. And what I mean by that is that I don't let this bottom edge dry out too much. Otherwise it will leave a mark. You see it's starting already, interestingly enough. There we go. But it doesn't really matter. We're just going to roll that down. There we go. Now the way to do a perfect wash, and by perfect what I mean is a very even wash, is actually to use a very big brush and go about 3 or 4 times, and what you'll get then is a really nice even wash. But we're not bothered about that. It's all just about the process and enjoying this, because it's great fun. These are super quick to do. You get great results, and yeah, I think the best thing really is when you give someone, like I say, as a card, and they go, "Wow, that's really cool." It's just, I don't know, makes you feel good, doesn't it? Makes you feel good, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this dilute stuff again, but I'm going to do what I call a dry brush technique, where I'm sort of dragging this, because this really here is the water. So what you're doing is you're doing a kind of an expressive shorthand for water. You're not drawing every wave, but using a dry brush technique is a good way of kind of doing a suggestion of water. So I'll show you how that works. So we're going to start over this side, and I'm just going to take that across there like that. Not too wet, otherwise it just comes straight off the brush. Some on this side, some on that side, thus like that. And now as I get under the lighthouse here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more on, because I want to try and show some sort of shadow. This will make a bit more sense when I put the land in. So don't be afraid to put a little bit on and then spread that out a little bit. And then as we get further into the horizon, again, small thin strokes, because it gives a bit of perspective, as if, you know, the sea is going away from you. So that's perfect for that. I can dry those, but what I'll do first is I will do the second stage to this one, because there's kind of only 2 stages to this and maybe a bit of embellishment. But that needs to be dried first. So I need to dry all 3 of these again. So it's a trip to the hairdryer for me. I'll be back in a minute. So what you might notice about these is as they dry, they get paler. So don't be afraid to be a bit bold with some of your ink work, because it will get knocked back as it dries, and it loses a little bit of that depth of colour. Now I presume that's because water allows the dye to float on the surface, and water is in fact transparent like glass, but as soon as the dye goes into the paper, then some of it will sink below the surface, I assume. I don't know. If anybody has any thoughts about that, it's not that I need to know the science behind it, but I'm just curious, really. Anyway, so let's do the next stage of the little suburban house. We're going to crack on and do that. Okay, so we're using the full paint here, and we're going to, again, not be too precious about sticking within the lines. We could be a bit wonky. You can do some extra bits. I'm going to do that roof in one wash. Actually, I should have enough to do this chimney as well. We'll put that in. And then I'll wet this brush again. Now the key thing with this one is I want you to leave the windows, because we're going to be doing something with those in a bit. So don't fill in the windows, and make sure you leave enough space. Okay, here, so I'm just dragging this ink down. Again, try not to leave any dry edges. Try and keep your edges pretty wet. It doesn't matter though if you have any bits that don't work out right. Doesn't matter what you do with this bottom bit. I mean, that's the lovely thing about all this stuff. It doesn't really matter. It's just paper. There you go. Cool. So then the other one is going to be again, another kind of wonky roof space. And we'll put in some chimneys. You can put some chimney pots in this one if you want, something a bit, a bit esoteric. Doesn't matter again. And then I'm just trying not to get too much of a wet edge there. So what I'll do is I'll go back in. Now if you drip on here, you make any mistakes, just roll with it. It really doesn't matter. One of the things about working with ink is you get a little bit, sometimes there is a bit of stress because you can make a mistake. So here, what we're going to do is I'm going to just drip a bit on here. Oops, I made a splash. See? It doesn't matter. Do that on purpose. Takes away the fear of it. What's it called? Immersion therapy. Okay, so we're going to leave that as is. That looks really good. And we're kind of almost finished with that one now. So the next stage with this one, which is the mountain one, is again, it's the sort of last stage really, is we're going to paint in this. So I'm going to start at this side. I'm going to just really vaguely sketch in some sort of trees. I'm not going to be too precious with this one. And choose a little line along the bottom. And the same thing here. Now you can run this all the way down to the bottom, then cut it off if you want a nice straight edge. But I would just try and leave it a little bit sketchy. Try not to be too prescriptive, is that the word? Yeah. I often find that if art has a little bit of, looseness to it, a little bit of character, it's no bad thing. So again, we don't want to leave that wet edge for too long, so we'll go back and keep running that across. All this from just one little ink cartridge. It's good going. So we'll do some deciduous trees in there, and maybe some tall pines. And I hope that's reading as a barn or a house, but again, I'm not that fussed. It's a sort of abstract landscape. So there we go. Very cool. And then for the last one here, which is the lighthouse, we just need to put that last layer in. Now we're just putting a layer in over the land and up the lighthouse and in those trees and houses. It's pretty, hopefully we'll have enough ink. Pretty straightforward, this one. And again, you can completely make this up as you go. There we go. It's a lovely colour, this, actually. I think it's much... I often find with ink is I love the colours when they're wet, because I love that intensity, and I love the glossiness of them. And when they're drying, they go slightly sort of matte. It loses its... Oops, ink on the table. Gonna get in trouble. Loses a bit of the joy of it in a way. But yeah, that looks great. Again, we'll do like a deciduous type tree thing there. Again, not too fussy with it. It's just a really fun little drawing. Don't worry about making any mistakes. Now, what you could do here is you could dilute a little bit of this rich stuff down. And again, you could, because I put the shadow in the wrong place there. You see, I put it there, but actually the shadow is like here. So I could just add in a little bit more detail here. A little bit of that dry brush. Why not, just to suggest, hint at the land. Perfect. So there you go. So we've got 3 versions there. Ooh. I've just spilt the ink all over the table. So this is why we can't have nice things. Yeah, so the table's got a lovely blue tint to it over there now. All my diluted ink's gone. So yeah, you maybe want to put something down for this, because you make a mess. So what I've got here is a little dip pen, and I'm going to use the same ink. Now, it'd be better if I hadn't spilt it everywhere. And I'm just going to add in some little gulls. Very twee, but I like it. There we go. So that's quite fun. We can maybe finish off the top of the lighthouse, add in some other details if you want to do some sort of, I don't know, some further stuff. Now with this one, I think what I was going to do is I was going to paint in the windows, because I quite like the idea of that. Now here's a little micro palette of mine. Tiny little micro palette that's been sitting in my desk. I'm just going to clean that yellow up a bit. Okay, so I'm going to use a little bit of this Hansa yellow, and I think the yellow will work quite well with the blue. Yeah, the paint ran a little bit, but I'm not really that bothered about that. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly put in some wonky window frames. There we go. You can draw some people in those windows if you wanted, but I'm not going to bother. So here we go. Here's these 3 finished little pieces. They're really fun. I hope you enjoyed those. Do feel free to look at any scene. Obviously, you know, whether it's a silhouette of somebody stood against a sunset, you could use some colourful inks. You could do a simple line of trees with some birds flying away and the sky in the background. But you've got elements where you can choose a background. You can use the ink for those amazing skies. You can use your middle ground and then foreground and paint in some details. But the process is so simple that you can do 10 in a row, you know, just practice, or just chop up lots of little bits of paper and practice doing some inky skies. You'll learn an awful lot, particularly about wet in wet technique, where you wet the paper down first and then you apply the ink on. So we're going to be doing a lot more ink tutorials because I love working with inks. I find it really interesting, and you can get some really nice graphic sort of illustrative pieces done, and it's all applicable to watercolour. It's all water media. So yeah, hope you enjoyed those, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.